You know what sometimes is a lot of fun for me? It's something that a lot of people don't enjoy. However, it is something that, in my particular profession, so to speak, even if this is just merely a hobby, it's something that can actually be quite awesome. That's being wrong. Being wrong sometimes can be attributed as a sign of weakness or a sign of lack of exploration or simply lack of experimentation. However, in the particular realm of being an album reviewer, a music listener, a music fan, sometimes being wrong can quite simply be because of the way that something hits you the first time around. And I'm here to prove that, actually. Now, of course, back in May, the Deftones released their latest album, Diamond Eyes. And a lot of the people in this community have already covered this album, so I'm actually quite late in my review. However, the reason why this is so late is pretty simple, actually. Of course, as most of you know, I work at a music store, and this particular music store offers 30-second audio samples of the albums in which we have available in that system. Now, whenever I listen to the audio samples of Diamond Eyes, I've got to be honest with you, I really wasn't all that impressed. In fact, I was kind of disappointed, and I kind of did a rookie mistake, which is something that's very odd for the cover killer to do, obviously, which was I judged this book by its cover and by what this would consider to be the book flaps, telling me of what this album would be about or what the book would be about to really serve this metaphor. Now, of course, last night in my blog TV, I actually listened to this album all the way through for the first time, and I did it with a studio audience, so to speak, in order to kind of have my back and also experience my reaction to this album with me. And, of course, the result, to fit with the theme of this video, is my being extremely wrong. Now, a lot of people have said that this is a fantastic album. A lot of the people in this community have said it's one of the best albums of 2010, and I kind of wondered why they thought this. And last night, I kind of started to understand it a little bit better. This album is actually very stylish, and it's really dynamic and unique. Now, the Deftones, surprisingly enough, a lot of people have tagged as either new alternative, new metal. They've kind of lumped them together in this crop of bands that's kind of been around since the late 1990s. You know, bands such as Godsmack, the Deftones, Disturbed, Korn, and others. Yeah, that's right. They actually lump them in with these other bands that really don't impress much lately. And it's really kind of an unfair assumption, because the Deftones have always kind of been a cut above the rest. Either that, have always kind of been the stylistic leaders of this genre, because they're always kind of more in tune to trying something experimental or unique. A good example is that on Adrenaline and Around the Fur, their style was a little bit more aggressive and a little bit raw, a little bit more metal-y. And this was before, of course, the trends of metalcore and new metal really took off. Then, whenever they entered into the 2000s, they started to blend the reality of that along with some more experimentation. And now you hear that a little bit more in some of the experimental bands that came out of the 2000s, such as your ISISes and your Pelicans. And now they've actually gone into another realm, something that I actually really liked, something that I actually debuted the style last night in a way that, well, I think really shocked everybody. Yeah, I'm probably going to shock the world and get a whole lot of haters for what I'm about to say. But I'm going to do it, because, you know, sometimes you have to really start something that doesn't seem quite right in order for it to really catch on and for people to kind of recognize it. Diamond Eyes is kind of like the Deftones and the new metal or the new alternative sound, almost post-bordering or bordering on avant-garde. Yeah. Consider the musical patterns on this particular record. Consider the riffing. Consider the way in which these soundscapes are constructed. It's not very far-fetched from that the Deftones have done in the past. However, it has evolved stylistically just enough where it kind of reminds you of some avant-garde works. And whenever you think about Chino Moreno's voice, if you think about his vocals, if you think about the way that he projects his emotion through his vocals and through his lyrics, it kind of goes together hand in hand. It's really strange that it does, but whenever I listen to this, that's exactly what I thought of. Now, I'm not going to say that they have kind of gone in this direction their entire career, because there's definitely been an evolution here to Deftones that kind of has gotten them to this point. They've of course always thrived on being a little bit more experimental and being a little bit more different than the other bands of this genre. If you take a look at albums by Godsmack, if you take a look at albums by Korn, you're either going to see a steady kind of plateau, or you're going to see a mountaintop that goes right to a recessed decline, to a valley. With the Deftones, however, they're kind of on this staircase incline, and the only time where the staircase has led downward was with their self-titled record right after White Pony. It was one of those albums where, for their catalog, it really just was okay. It really didn't have that much to really offer, not to mention it wasn't a cut above the rest, as the other three albums were stylistically, within that particular genre. Diamond Eyes definitely captures that particular essence once again, the essence that the Deftones' self-titled record kind of failed to accomplish. If you've noticed from a lot of the more mainstream releases this year, your Bullet for My Valentine's, your Korn CDs, which are going to be released in about a week or so, and everything else, they've kind of remained on the same pattern, or on the same level of what they've done before. In fact, I'll be the first to say that Bullet for My Valentine has progressively gotten more and more dull, boring, and listless, and actually achieved their most prominent success and most important album with their debut, and now has been mainstreamed to death, to the point that it's actually affected their songwriting. The Deftones, on the other hand, continue to experiment, and of course, they've had a lot of inspiration, considering the problems that have surrounded the band, considering what happened to the bass player. However, that doesn't mean that this cut above the rest philosophy is 100% based off of this. It's really 100% based off the fact that that's what the Deftones have kind of always been about. And this album actually continues that particular philosophy. So for those of you who have actually not given Diamond Eyes its fair chance yet, and those of you who perhaps have taken my word from beforehand if we ever spoke about it, and decided not to check this out, or kind of has put it off, so to speak, give it a listen. I'm actually doing you guys a favor. I'm doing myself a favor and saying, plain and simple, my name is COVERKILLERNATION, and whenever it comes to the Deftones' Diamond Eyes, my original assumption was wrong. Yeah. 30-second audio samples at FYE for this particular album are not very strong. And the funny thing is that I wasn't the only person that shared this opinion. One of my coworkers shared the opinion, not to mention 2 or 3 other people that I had exposed to it that were Deftones or alternative metal fans. So a lot of people actually had this philosophy around my particular store based upon what they heard. So this is one of those times where if you hear the audio samples and you're not impressed, it's time to kind of take a risk, because the audio samples really don't do this album justice. It's very stylish, it's very evolved, not to mention it's very atmospheric. Like I said, almost like new metal or new alternative avant-garde. And that's a genre that, well, honestly, if it took off, might actually eradicate this new metal shit from the planet. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's start the movement. If you haven't checked out Deftones' Diamond Eyes, check it out. If you have, and you just want to point and laugh at me for being a stupid idiot, go for it. Either way, I'm admitting that I'm wrong, and I'm also admitting that I'll definitely be listening to this album a lot. And yeah, I am wearing a Pink Floyd shirt because Pink Floyd got ousted in the Music Madness tournament. Am I bitter? Nah. It's mostly because I don't have a Dream Theater shirt. Take care, guys.